Okay, so let's start with food chains. We all know what a food chain is. So basically, a food chain is a way to understand how energy is moving throughout an ecosystem from one animal to another. It's the pathway in which energy is transferred throughout an ecosystem, any ecosystem out in the environment. And so really what this is looking at is who's eating who, right? Who's eating who in the environment and how is that energy working from the bottom up. And so we have different levels within a food chain and things progress as they go through those different levels. So does anybody have an idea what might start everything within a food chain? I see a hand in the back, yeah. What's that?
I said the sun.
The sun, did you say the sun? Perfect. So what does the sun supply? To who is the energy from the sun going to?
The grass.
Plants, right? So plants are what we call autotrophs, which means they make their own food. So they use energy from the sun and they make their food. And that's really important because plants are pretty much the foundation or the base for all ecosystems everywhere. We really rely on that. They get that energy started, and then everybody else relies on that. So then we move past that primary producer, which is what we call plants as the producers, because they're producing that initial energy. And then we work our way up the scale to consumers, right? So these consumers are no longer autotrophs. They can't make their own food. They have to consume their food, right? They have to eat things so that they can get energy. So we have our primary consumers, which is at the very bottom of the scale, right above plants, right? And we consider herbivores. Have you guys heard of herbivores before? So these are animals that eat plants, right? So that makes sense because everything's at the bottom still with the plants. They made all the initial energy, and then we have to have herbivores that start eating those plants so that they can start pulling energy further up into the food chain. So we have animals like insects. A lot of insects eat plants, right? We have there's a lot of animals that eat plants that are herbivores. Think about even like deer. Like deer just walk around and graze, right, on vegetation. And then so lots of primary consumers. Then we work further up into the food chain, right? So now we're getting past just our first level consumers and we work into what we call our secondary consumers. So now these can be carnivores. So now these are maybe animals that are eating those herbivores, right? So we're getting higher up in the scale and so on and so forth. And then we can work up to secondary consumers, and then we can work up to what we call tertiary consumers. Now these are carnivores eating carnivores that are below them. Does this all make sense to everybody? How energy is going to work its way up the food chain as other animals keep eating other animals? So now this part's a little interesting. Think about this. Not all energy gets transferred every time something eats something, right? So we have this general rule of thumb where only 10% of the energy in a layer below it gets transferred to the layer above it, which is kind of wild to think about, but it makes sense. So think about this. Think about something that's at the very top of the food chain, right? Let's say an alligator. You don't see hundreds of alligators swarming like you do mosquitoes, right, which are much lower in the food chain. So as you get higher in the food chain, you don't have as much energy present. So they can't support as many animals. You may have bigger animals, so we recognize them more often. But if you think about total number of animals, you don't see as many animals that are at the top of the food chain like alligators compared to really small animals like insects that are your herbivores lower down, right? So kind of cool to think about. And again, that's because just not all energy can make its way up. And that's for a couple different reasons. First of all, just animals don't eat 100% of the animals they eat, right? Like things like bones are left over, and we put energy into growing our bones too, right? I mean, everything that's in us takes energy to function. Energy is lost as heat. So we are what we call endotherms, which means we make our own body heat, right? That doesn't just come for free. We have to burn energy to keep ourselves warm, right? So energy is lost throughout this food chain as it works its way up. And that's why we can't support as many of those bigger animals at the top of food chains. Okay, cool. So let's see. I am going to let's do a little bit of an activity. Let's see how much we can work our way through a food chain. And I'm gonna get you guys to help me out with this, okay? I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see. Oh no, I'm showing you guys stuff that I don't want you to see yet. All right, can you all see my screen still?
Yes, sir.
Can you see the arrows and everything?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. All right, we'll make it a little bit bigger. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna get you guys to help me out with this. Let's see if we can fill in this food chain. All right. So who wants to tell me? We're gonna work from the bottom up, and who can tell me what they think goes at the bottom of this food chain? So we talked about all of our different layers, right? Our different levels. I see a hand went up with the white shirt.
I think the grass is at the bottom.
Yeah, the plants, right? Uh-oh. That didn't work quite like I want. Yeah, so let's take the plants and we're gonna move that right down there. Okay, perfect. So that's our primary producer, right? That's what's taking in the sunlight. It's using photosynthesis. It's making its own food, and that's starting the foundation for our whole food chain, right? Okay, perfect. Let's see. Who thinks they can tell me what's gonna go next? Anybody? I see a hand in the far back with the jacket.
The grasshopper.
Perfect. Yep, I heard grasshopper. So what is our grasshopper? I can't quite hear you all the way in the back, but it's an herbivore, right? Like grasshoppers eat plant material. We know that, right? So a lot of insects fill that primary consumer role, or that first level within the chain that's eating the plants. All right, who thinks they know what's next? I see in the pink coat, someone's raising their hand. Did you say the frog?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So that's our first level carnivore, right? So that's kind of our secondary consumer. Frogs oftentimes eat insects once they come on land and consume a lot of insects. And then that leaves our last animal, right? Our snake. So oftentimes snakes might not be at the very top of the food chain, but in terms of the 4 animals we have left, it definitely makes sense that they would be the top predator in that food chain, right? Does that make sense, everybody?
Yes, sir.
All right, really good job with that. So now we've been talking about food chains only, right? But we also know that there's something called food webs. So the big difference between food chains and food webs is that systems like this oftentimes are not that simple, right? We know we have more herbivores present in an environment than just grasshoppers. There's even many more different types of plants than just corn. We could have different levels of our primary consumers. So food chains are not, or ecosystems are not this simple. So what a food chain does is it only shows you one pathway of how energy can move through that environment. But oftentimes, environments and ecosystems are much more complex than just a food chain. And that's where we start to get into our food webs. So as you can see, I've introduced 3 new animals now, right? And so the difference between a food chain and a food web is a food web starts to explore all of the different interactions within an environment. And so oftentimes you have animals that eat more than just one type of animal. They are eaten by more than just one type of animal. And we really start to see all of the different interactions that can happen within an environment, right? Okay, so let's see if we can start to fill this in. So who can tell me out of these 3 new animals, where they're going to fall in that food chain. So you can see I reproduced the food chain already. I left it how it was. In the middle with the purple.
Really loud.
Which one did we say?
The mouse. The mouse.
Who's gonna eat the mouse? The snake. She said the snake is gonna eat the mouse.
Okay, perfect. So we know the snake's a little bit above the mouse, right? So we can put the mouse, let's say, right around here. Who do we think is going to be at the very top of the food chain now? On the left-hand side with the t-shirt?
Landon?
Oh.
He said the very top. Who's gonna eat everybody?
The eagle.
Perfect. Yes, the eagle, right? All right, very cool. So the eagle's over there, and then we will throw our bird over here. Okay, so now this is where it's going to start to get tricky. So now we have to start figuring out where all the new interactions come into play. So we've already established, I think I heard earlier, that the snake is going to eat the mouse, right? And so let's go ahead and fill that in. So just to give everybody an idea of where we're at, the arrows point to what is getting consumed by what, right? So the arrows you can see right now, the snake is eating the frog, so the frog's arrow goes to the snake. So we said the mouse is going to be eaten by the snake, right? So let's draw another arrow going there. Who do you think the mouse is going to eat? Anybody on the far right-hand side with the t-shirt?
Alex said?
Yes, he has.
Well,
Say that question again, Mr. Tom.
who do we think, what is the mouse going to eat?
What will the mouse eat, Alex said?
The grasshopper.
He said the grasshopper.
Sure, absolutely. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and fill that in. So now we have the grasshopper coming over to the mouse. Perfect. Anything else? What else might the mouse eat? Anybody have any other ideas? In the middle with the white shirt?
Frog.
A mouse probably won't eat an animal as big as a frog. They might go for insects smaller than that, like the grasshopper, but might not eat the frog, but that's a good guess. They might. And the far back with the purple? What'd she say? Can someone help me hear her?
Grass.
Yes, the plants, right? Perfect. So do we know what we call an animal that can eat both plants and animals? Does anybody know? They're called
Plants and animals.
Oh, omnivore.
an omnivore. Perfect. Awesome. So this is where we really start to see our food webs getting complex, right? Because now we don't even have animals that are just eating other animals. Now we have animals that could be eating plants and animals. So you can see how this is already starting to get a little bit complex. We already have our mouse eating the grasshopper and the plants. Let's see. What about the bird on the right? So that bird on the right is just an insectivore, which means it primarily just eats insects. So I already gave that one away a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and draw that one in. But the grasshopper is also going to feed this bird. Does that make sense to everybody?
Sir.
All right, what else can the snake eat?
Oh.
On the left with the pink? Miss Jordan, can you help me hear people?
Say that one more time. What was the question, Mr. Tom?
What else can the snake eat?
What else can the snake eat? Savannah?
The frog.
A frog. Perfect. What else? I see one more.
Landon?
The bird.
Yeah, the bird, for sure. And what do you know what they'll oftentimes snakes will eat like eggs, like bird eggs or something if they find a nest, if they can climb up into the nest and eat the eggs. So sure, we'll definitely put an arrow from this bird over here to the snake as well. Don't mind my arrows, as long as you can see where the lines are going. That's the key thing there. Okay, and then we have our apex predator at the top. So what do you think is going to go to that eagle? In general, I'm just going to go ahead. Yeah, I see one hand raising up high in the back.
The snake.
Yep, for sure. It's going to eat the snake. What else?
The mouse.
The mouse, absolutely.
The bird.
Oh, no. Okay. The snake. I don't know why that arrow doesn't want to go. Yeah, he definitely might eat the bird. I heard that as well. Okay, so the big picture I want you guys to take away from this is, look how many arrows we just added to our food chain to make our food web just by adding 3 new animals. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 right off the bat. So really cool to think about, right? That just by adding 3 new animals to a food chain to now make our food web, that we've added 9 new interactions. So that really starts to get at the idea that a lot of animals in our environments and our ecosystems are linked together, right? And so everything is going to be impacting everything at the same time. And it is not as simple as just one pathway working up with a food chain, right? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, sir.
So then we can really start to get at what's the importance of looking at food webs with our environment. We can start to answer some questions when we look at food webs. So let's go to our next slide. I have the arrows pre-filled in, but let's talk about what would happen if we did something like we removed all of the insects from our environment. Let's talk about, so we have all of our interactions that we added now. So this is our food web we're looking at. And you can see I got rid of our grasshopper. Our insects are gone. And that could happen for any reasons. Let's say maybe they really are in a cornfield and the farmers are applying insecticides because they don't want insects eating all their crops, right? So they try to get rid of them. So what's going to happen if we get rid of those insects? How's that going to impact the rest of the food web? Let's see a hand on the left with the pink one up first.
The animals that eat the insects will have any food to eat.
Say that one more time. The animals that eat the insects
Won't have any food.
won't have any food to eat, so then what happens?
They can go if they die. Thank you.
She was trying to say that the animals that eat the insects will not have any food to eat, and so therefore they will go extinct.
Okay, so she's right on, right? Like there's gonna be impacts further up the food web if the food source that they need disappears. So if we look at this food web we have, right? The only thing the frog, now again, this is keep in mind, this is still probably way more simple than an actual food web would be in an environment. But for all intents and purposes, what we're looking at, let's take a look at our frog. The only arrow he had going to him was from the insect. And if those insects disappear, then there might not be a whole lot for the frogs to eat, right? And we know animals need energy for things like growth and development. So now there goes our frog. He might not survive in that environment anymore. And there goes that interaction. And then who else had only one arrow going to them in this food web? Our bird over here, right? They were only feeding off of that insect. So now our bird's gone. That animal's also gone from the environment now. The frog can no longer go to the snake, so we'll get rid of that interaction. The bird can no longer go to that snake, so we'll get rid of that interaction over there. Fortunately, the mouse can still feed off of that vegetation, right? So can you see this interaction? Can you see my cursor? That can still feed off of the veg. So these 3 animals can probably still persist, right? The mouse could feed off of the veg, that could feed the snake, which could feed that apex predator. But just take a look at how simple that food web got and how many animals we lost just because one animal was taken out of that environment. So does that kind of demonstrate how critically linked everything is within a food web and how important it is to understand how connected everything is, because if just one thing changes, that can alter the rest of the food web. That makes sense to everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about humans. So how do you think we are part of food webs?
Yes. No.
Well, we are, right? Like we're gonna have impacts on these food webs and these ecosystems, right? So a primary example of that is who would be applying those insecticides that would get rid of all the grasshoppers? We would, right? Farmers, which are people. So we can have some really big impacts on ecosystems and environments, right? And so that's really important to understand as well, is we need to understand how we can be impacting ecosystems. Another big example is, when people go out and hunt, right? Like what do we hunt? We hunt deer and things like that. We're controlling a population. So deer populations could probably get much more dense if we didn't hunt them, which means they would eat a lot more veg. A lot of the veg would be gone, and then so on and so forth. And you can see how just everything is linked, right? Okay, very cool. All right, let's get into some of the fun stuff. So I have an animal. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna stop sharing, and hopefully you'll be able to see me again. Can you all see me again? Yeah?
Yes,
Okay. All right.
Wait, we're gonna get that water.
I need you to be quiet.
So everybody say hi to Stanley. Stanley is, here, I'll put him this way. Stanley is what we call an African pancake tortoise. So you can see how flat his shell is, right? Usually when we see different turtles and tortoises, their shell will be much more domed, right? And that's because they really rely on their shells for protection. But what's really cool about Stanley is how flat his shell is. And that's really important for him. So pancake tortoises rely on being able to duck into rocks and crevices where they're found in Africa. So this animal is not found here. It is not native, which means it's not originating from locations like Georgia. They are found in Africa. But they're really cool. They rely on being able to tuck into crevices and rocks to get away from predators. And what's really cool is their shells are really light. They're not heavy at all because they are so flexible and flat. And so it's oftentimes thought that these guys will actually prefer to make a run for it instead of going and tucking into their shell like a lot of other turtles and tortoises will for protection. Instead, they'll try to get away. And they're thought to be pretty fast, one of the fastest tortoises in the world. And so they'll use that as a bit of a defense mechanism. But let's try to relate Stanley to what we've been talking about, which is food chains and food webs, right? Does anybody have an idea as to where Stanley might fall in a food chain, which level he would be at? Yeah, in the pink?
Does he produce his own food? Okay, so that means he's a consumer. What level consumer? We talked about a primary or secondary or tertiary.
Primary.
Primary, because what's he eating?
Grass.
Okay.
Perfect. Absolutely. So Stanley is absolutely an herbivore. So he is a primary consumer. He's going to fall a little bit lower on that food chain, right? Or even within the food web. And what I have here with me and Stanley, and he might get really excited about this. Let's see if I can show.
Oh.
We have a little bit of salad for Stanley. So I don't know if he will be interested right now. He might not be super interested because, he's out and about right now. But we can see. We'll let Stanley hang out. And so he might be interested in this.
gotta check it out first.
So while we're watching Stanley, does anybody know what this is called? This is called enrichment. So this is not part of the normal diet that we provide Stanley. This is actually a specialty item for Stanley. Oh, so there you go. You can see he's gonna start enjoying that snack that he was given. And so this is a treat for him for sure. So when we are at locations like Chiho Park and Zoo, oftentimes we give our animals enrichment, which is a specialty item that they might not get. And so this is definitely a treat for him. And you can see he's not, that didn't take very long for him to start feeding off of what I pulled for him this morning, which is really fresh as well. So really cool, right? So now you can see in action an herbivore in a food chain eating what it would eat. So they do rely in Africa on vegetation as their diet. That's also important for them because where they're found might be a bit more dry. So they also get some of their water from the vegetation they eat. So it's really important for them. What do you think going further up the food chain might go after Stanley, our pancake tortoise? Anybody have any ideas?
Who would be a predator to Stanley?
Snake?
Sure. Sure. Yep. And then if we go back to, I think you guys saw the picture already. Let's see. You saw that picture of a mongoose earlier, right? That little mammal that looked pretty cute.
Yeah.
But that's actually a predator of Stanley in Africa. Let's see.
So would Stanley be the predator or the prey?
So Stanley is the prey for sure for these mongooses. So they look really nice, right? But they're actually predators of Stanley. Okay. Perfect. So now, and we could go up the food chain even more. Even those mongooses aren't apex predators, they also have predators that can go after them. And so just a cool way to show you a food chain, right? So we know we have our primary producers here, even we have our plants, we have our herbivore. We saw what one of the predators of Stanley might look like in Africa. So really cool way to work up a food chain. Does anybody have any questions about Stanley?
Did anybody write down any
You
questions?
can see him munching. He's really enjoying that.
I think question. All right, Savannah, what's your question?
What does he do for fun?
What does he do for fun?
Fun.
Stanley spends most of his time tucked in rocks. So that might not be the same idea of fun as we have, right? But we can bring this back one more time too. So I was talking about earlier that we have to consider how we impact food webs, right? So what is one way that you think we might impact an animal like Stanley?
Walking.
What's that?
Walking. Like walking somewhere. Like you
Miss
might.
Jordan, can you help me hear them a little bit, please?
He's saying walking in the woods, like you might. I mean, not necessarily Stanley because he's from Africa, but
Okay, so disturbing animals, right? Sure. But one thing, yeah, do we have other ideas on the left?
They could get one of them could get run over the car.
okay, so being run over, like if they're crossing the road and humans run them over.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, absolutely. That's a big problem for turtles and tortoises here. Even in the States all the time. In fact, people actually have started putting up signs now to make people aware of where common areas are. So we always see like deer crossing, right, to make people aware that deer might be in the area. But now even signs for other animals like turtles are starting to go up so that we can make people aware of common travel locations for animals. So really good. Yep, that's one way. Does anybody have any other ideas? There's one more I have in mind.
Angel? He said fishing.
Okay, so that's a good example of how we pull other animals from the environment. So yeah, we definitely consume animals, right? Like we catch fish to eat them. So that's definitely like we're pulling that energy out of that food web. Absolutely. But one other one that's really common for reptiles is they get pulled from the environment too for the pet trade. So when we're pulling animals from their environment for the pet trade, like we're removing them from the food web, right? If we pull them from the environment, they're no longer there. They can't be eaten. They can't contribute their energy further up the food chain, right? So that's one way that we as people are impacting. And you guys named a bunch of other really good ones too. Does that make sense? So that all factors in, right?
Yes, sir.
Very cool. Okay, and then one other note that we can talk about as well is, so in our food chain, we talked about the hawk being at the top of the food web, right? So I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I'll do one more little activity with you guys. And then we'll go from there. Sorry, Stanley is... Okay, let's see. Everybody see the hawk?
Yes, sir.
So this is Maverick. This is a red-shouldered hawk. Uh-oh. Hopefully it'll play. All right, while we're talking about that, let's talk about, while we're waiting, it might not go. So one way that we can also protect animals too, and just a little bit of the conservation note, is a lot of times birds that are at the top of these food chains and these food webs that are apex predators, other things that are at the top along with those hawks are things like owls. And so one thing we can really be conscious of is what we're putting out in the environment as people too. So one cool example is we use poison to kill rats a lot of times, right? When we set rat traps, and that works its way up the food chain too, right? So if the rat's poisoned and then it runs out into the environment and then it gets eaten by an owl, guess who's gonna get sick? That owl's gonna get sick from now moving that poison further up the food web. All right, I'm sorry, I don't know why that video is not working, but it was a video of Maverick consuming some prey as well. And that's what I have for you guys. Does anybody have any questions? I can open it up for questions now.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Tom? Landon.
Sea turtles and stuff, they could get plastic and stuff could get stuck in their neck.
All right, he's asked about sea turtles and basically how they are getting a lot of pollution inside of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that a lot of marine life is struggling with right now is plastic pollution, right? So you've probably seen the really famous pictures of turtles with straws stuck in their nose and things like that. But turtles can even mistake things like bags as jellyfish because they don't understand. And so absolutely, that's a role we're playing in ecosystems as well, right? Is that we're putting a lot of plastics out into the water. That's why we really try to stress recycling and using things like an Nalgene as a reusable water bottle instead of using, plastic water bottles. There's a lot of steps that you can take in your everyday life to try to reduce your plastic use, and that can definitely help benefit, or at least try to do our part to control one of those big polluters, which is plastic. But you don't really think of a pollutant, but plastics break down. They break down into little tiny microplastics that you can't even see, but they're filling our marine systems everywhere. So really good question.
Kaylee, is it fun working at Chiho Park with all the animals?
Kaylee asked, is it a lot of fun to work at Chiho Park with all the animals?
I cannot express how much fun it is. I feel so lucky to work here. It is really cool working with all the animals, especially since we get some special animals like Stanley, who's not even necessarily native to Georgia. So yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of fun.
Kanisha?
Do you have foreign names of animals that you have?
Do you guys have any more African animals besides Stanley?
Any other African animals? Let me think.
The cheetahs.
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. So I was thinking in my education department, yeah, but absolutely. We have the cheetahs here for sure. Yeah.
When Stanley gets sick, does he have a special medicine?
When Stanley gets sick, does he have a special medicine that he has to take?
That's a really good question that I don't know, to be honest. I know that, we have an animal care team here, and they do monitor all of our animals. So as soon as we start to notice something abnormal with maybe the way they're eating, or if they're not, going to the bathroom regularly, or even if we see anything visible, we definitely have a vet check out our animals. So we have lots of precautions we can take. To make sure if our animals do get sick that we can find the appropriate way to treat them. And all of our animals do have ways that we can help them. I don't know specifically what Stanley's treatment would be, but we monitor all of our animals, and we can have a vet check them out if it comes to that. So absolutely.
Hannah? What made you want to be a person that works with animals that way?
I got involved in this kind of job because not only do I want to be educated, learning about how animals are being impacted, what the basic systems are behind animals. So if we can understand the basic systems behind animals, then we can start to learn about how we're impacting them and how we can save them. The reason I wanted to be an educator is because I don't want to understand it myself. I want to be able to help people like you guys understand it as well, and hopefully get other people excited about finding ways that we can help protect our animals everywhere.
When you first started there, what was your favorite animal?
She said, well, when you started working there, what was your favorite animal?
So I wish I could have them with me right now. My personal favorite is Red. So Red is an eastern screech owl. They're really small owls. They're only about this big. And that's kind of one of the animals that I was talking about right when I was saying, let's try to avoid using poisons when we're setting traps for rats and stuff, because owls are definitely one animal that can really be impacted further up the food web by having that poison work its way up. So, right, if you think about it, when the energy is getting transferred up those different levels within those food chains, those food webs, everything that's in that animal is also going to get transferred up, right? So if they have poison in their system and they get eaten, that's going to go up to other animals as well, especially like animals towards the top of that food chain. But yeah, Red's definitely one of my favorites. He's a really cool bird.
I think that's all our questions, Mr. Tom.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope you all enjoyed it.
What do we say?
Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Hope to see you guys again, okay?
All right, bye, Mr. Tom.
All right, bye. Take care.